The U.S. military bombed Islamic State positions in Somalia for the first time on Friday. The Defense Department's U.S. Africa Command says it conducted 2 sets of airstrikes against IS militants in the northeastern region of Somalia, killing several fighters. The airstrikes were conducted over 2 days in coordination with the Somali government. The Islamic State group has suffered numerous defeats in the past several months, including the loss of its stronghold in the Iraqi city of Mosul and their de facto capital, Raqqa. The strikes come as President Trump granted commanders greater authority to conduct airstrikes earlier this year.
Nuclear weapons despite Pyongyang's possession of nukes. He also said there can be no military action on the Korean peninsula without the South's consent. Moon said South Korea will continue working for peace on the peninsula. The North Korea nuclear crisis will take center stage when U.S. President Donald Trump begins a trip to Asia at the end of the week. A series of weapons tests by Pyongyang and a war of words between Trump and North Korean leader Kim Jong-un in recent months has raised fears about an armed conflict.
The B-1B Lancer could be used to strike North Korean missile sites. Here's what the bomber could do.
What is confronting the president and perhaps confronting North Korea at the top of this agenda?
Good morning, Bill. And the first few stops of this trip for the president and his delegation will be Japan, South Korea, and China, countries that are either under threat from North Korea or, in the case of China, allied with North Korea. So just before he left the South Lawn of the White House this morning, about an hour ago, the president says he is expecting good things from this trip.
I think we're going to have great success. We'll be talking about trade. We'll be talking about, obviously, North Korea. We'll be enlisting the help of a lot of people and countries. We'll see what happens, but I think we're going to have a very successful trip. There's a lot of goodwill.
For Japan and South Korea, President Trump's visit is a show of support of the 2 U.S. allies, where the United States has maintained a military presence since the middle of last century. A senior administration official says, unlike his secretaries of state and defense and his vice president, President Trump will skip a visit to the demilitarized zone between North and South Korea because it's becoming cliched. A senior administration official also says China is doing a great deal to pressure North Korea, more than expected, though added it can always do more. And with that, yesterday, the Treasury Department announced that it was cutting off a small Chinese bank from the entire U.S. financial system because of alleged ties to the North Korean ballistic missile program, Bill.
Thank you, Rich. On that, there are also issues regarding the economy. And I would imagine in Beijing, China, these will be at the forefront. What are you hearing?
Absolutely. The president just a couple of days ago called the trade imbalance with China. He used the words horrible, embarrassing, and through the roof. It was a central tenet of President Trump's pitch to voters last year. It's something that the president and this administration say they are going to tackle when they go to China. Also, there are differences on Chinese cyber thieves taking information and intellectual property from U.S. companies. And there's also a dispute in the South China Sea, with China militarizing an area of disputed islands. So there is plenty to discuss between the two countries as the president makes his trip to Beijing.
Thank you, Rich. Rich Edson, State Department. Bit of a preview there.
Meanwhile, he's then going to head on to several Asian countries, including Japan, South Korea, China, the Philippines, and Vietnam. So our focus tonight, Pyongyang's complaints about new sanctions against the regime, calling them genocidal and brutal. So is that evidence that President Trump's efforts and the world efforts are working? Let's talk about it with Ambassador John Bolton and John Yoo, former Deputy Assistant Attorney General in the Bush administration. Gentlemen, good to see both of you tonight. And hopefully you can hear me all right. Let's plow ahead here, because we know that North Korea is going to be top of mind in the visits with all of these Asian countries and with all of these Asian leaders. Meantime, with that as the backdrop, we're now getting something that Democrats in the Senate have introduced a bill that would tie the president's hands with some of the things that he could do with respect to North Korea. John, in your estimation, is it constitutional?
No, I think this bill would be completely unconstitutional. As you know, the Constitution makes the president the commander-in-chief of the armed forces. It's always been understood that that means the president can choose what weapons to use to protect the national security of the United States and our foreign policy interests. Congress has never tried to pass any law under Republican or Democratic presidents trying to prevent him from using weapons to protect the country. I think it would be flatly unconstitutional, and actually, I think shows how desperate I'm afraid some people are in Congress to take advantage of this very serious imminent threat from North Korea and try to score political points off it.
Ambassador, here's what Senator Murphy, who's one of the sponsors apparently of this measure, says. He says, we need to take the president seriously when he threatens war because the dam could break at any moment. Republican and Democratic senators are alarmed over the path we're on, and it's important we join forces to reclaim Congress's constitutional role in matters of war and peace before there's no turning back. What do you make of that?
Well, I don't think he understands the Constitution. As John said, that's not Congress's function. It's to respond and to declare that a state of war exists. But take Pearl Harbor, since the president's about to go there. The Japanese attacked on December the 7th, 1941. Congress declared war on December the 8th. When did the war begin? Began on December the 7th. And the fact is, the real constitutional authority is the president's as commander-in-chief. There's nothing in the Constitution that says the president has to wait for the United States to be attacked. There's nothing in the Constitution that says he cannot act until Congress does. And indeed, to fulfill his responsibilities, he is fully empowered constitutionally to act in anticipatory defense. And I think these measures, look, we've seen Congress try to get involved in this so many times in the past. They passed the War Powers Act after Watergate. It's a complete charade, and so is this. It's pure partisan politics.
Ambassador, I also, before we leave this topic, want to ask you about China and whether you think that we've been tough enough with them when it comes to dealing with North Korea. Obviously, they have slightly different interests than we do, but at the end of the day, getting this rogue regime under control with regard to its nuclear program should be something that would benefit both.
It should, but in fact, China's been jiving the United States for 25 years. They've said repeatedly they don't want North Korea to have nuclear weapons, but they have not followed through on their really unique capability to force North Korea to that end. They upped the sanctions temporarily, and then when the U.S. turns its eyes away, it's back to business as usual. That's frankly why this trip to China by President Trump is so important. There is no more time to deal with North Korea. They are on the verge of getting a deliverable capability to hit us with thermonuclear weapons anywhere in the continental United States. And it's really time for China to tell us whether they're serious about this or not. Otherwise, the president's going to have to look to act unilaterally, Senator Murphy to the contrary notwithstanding, to protect the American civilian population.
Excuse me. Today we got a decision with regard to Bo Bergdahl, and he's not going to jail. So, John, do you think it's appropriate?
Now, as you may know, the prosecutors in the case recommended 14 years, dishonorable discharge, and a reduction in rank to private. And the judge, for reasons I do not understand, gave him no time and dishonorable discharge. This is a person who pled guilty to deserting his fellow men and women in uniform on a battlefield faced by a hostile enemy. I'm afraid that this is one of those cases that calls for very strong measures of justice, because men and women in the field, our young men and women in the field, have to be able to depend on their fellow brothers and sisters who are next to them. And they cannot be worrying in the back of their minds that someone's just going to wander off base and desert. Plus, you also have to take into account that our military then expended a great deal of time and resources and took casualties trying to find him because they assumed that Bergdahl had actually been kidnapped rather than had deserted.
Yeah, and we heard from families and from men whose lives were changed forever because they were out there searching for him and suffered grave harm in the process. The president tweeted today of this: the decision on Sergeant Bergdahl is a complete and total disgrace to our country and to our military. Ambassador, final word to you.
No, I think that's exactly right. This is a stain on the military justice system. Bergdahl pleaded guilty. There are no facts in dispute here. There's no mitigating circumstances. There's no reason to give precisely the sentence the prosecution recommended. I think the prosecution came in too low. But it's I just think this is going to cast a real pall over the morale of the armed forces to see this kind of person effectively walk away.
All right, Ambassador and John Yoo, great to see both of you tonight. Thank you for your time.
The United States Air Force conducted an exercise near the Korean Peninsula on Thursday involving two B-1B bombers and Japanese and South Korean fighter jets. The Pentagon has actually devised a plan to take out the North's missile sites just in case President Donald Trump ever orders the preemptive strike, and the B-1B Lancers would play a key role. Here's what we know about the plan and about what the Lancer can do. The Pentagon has other plans too, but such a United States strike is the best of a lot of bad options, one senior intelligence official told NBC News. A preemptive strike on the North's missile sites, however, could escalate the situation, prompting Kim Jong-un to strike South Korea or Guam. One senior military officer told NBC News that this risk of escalation is one reason why the Lancer would be used. It cannot carry nuclear warheads and it might temper Kim's response. But other officers, such as retired James Stavridis, are not convinced by the argument. The Lancers may strike the North's missile sites with their extended range joint air-to-surface standoff missiles, which have a range of 500 miles and allow the bombers to hit their targets from well outside of the North's borders. The Lancers would be escorted by an unknown number of fighter jets as well. The 2,100-mile flight from Guam to North Korea would take about 10 hours, and therefore the bombers would need to be refueled from KC-135s. If Trump decided to strike North Korea's approximately 24 missile sites, an unknown number of the 6 Lancers currently stationed in Andersen Air Force Base in Guam would be deployed. The Lancer has an internal payload of 75,000 pounds, more than any other United States bomber. And while the Lancer can't carry nuclear weapons, it is capable of carrying a variety of bombs and missiles. It has a 4-person crew, which includes a commander, co-pilot, and 2 combat systems officers. The Lancer can hit speeds of more than 900 miles per hour and climb to heights of more than 30,000 feet. Its 4 General Electric turbofan engines each provide the Lancer with more than 30,000 pounds of thrust. The B-1B Lancer, which was first used in combat in 1998, was heavily used in Operation Iraqi Freedom during the Iraq War, dropping nearly 40% of all the coalition's munitions. The B-1B Lancer is a long-range, multi-role heavy bomber that was developed in the 1970s as a replacement for the B-52.
Come up and take the rear. So like if he was parked, yeah, he would pull out first. They could have done it a different way. Doesn't really matter, I guess.
6 right, 10 sequence.
Rotate.
Ground say call sign.
2 to 1, flight at 250.
06 is my speed, wait for 4 and VHO. Nice slow turn.
Bullseye 235, 11.
Clear to pressurize.
Crew pressurizing. Flaps left.
Moving on for the airspeed here.
What's your speed, bro?
Six-zero contact, down 2. Little left. 6-0 disconnect.
Did you say that you're done offload completely or just to 1?
Just a 1.
And from 6-0, just a 1.
Okay.
He's coming. Drop back.
1-1 is complete, moving to...
Let me get that first guy back.
25.
5 feet. Off to the right. 6-0.